Welcome to Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono, the esteemed former Congresswoman known for her insightful perspectives and vast experience. Prepare to be engaged in thought-provoking conversations with influential personalities, exploring a wide range of topics, from social issues, politics, and policy, to personal development, shedding light on important issues that impact our society. Now, here's Mary.
Welcome to Sagely Speaking. I'm your host, Mary Bono. And before I introduce my esteemed guest for this week, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our sponsors who make this podcast possible: Mothers Against Prescription Drug Abuse and MAP to Action, and also Communities United for Smart Policy, or CUSP. All of our sponsorship information can be found on our website at sagelyspeaking.com. I'm incredibly grateful for their support in helping me make this podcast possible. Dr. Keith Humphreys is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford University and the author of Addiction, a Very Short Introduction, and a rather prestigious fact: to recognize his service to addiction-related services and scholarship in Britain, Queen Elizabeth made him an honorary officer in the Order of the British Empire in 2022. Now, I follow Keith on X, and I find his work and his thoughts to be very interesting. Like most people, usually I find them very interesting because I always believe in what he's saying, and I'm just so glad that he's here. Dr. Humphreys, Keith, welcome to Sagely Speaking.
Yeah, nice to talk to you always, Mary. So I'm grateful to be on your show.
Well, thank you. You just came out with a brand new article, and you tend to do this. You come out with articles that kind of contradict what people are thinking and doing. This latest one has done that. Yeah,
it's an interesting question, and it sort of contradicts who, So, this piece came out yesterday in The Atlantic, which I wrote with my friend Rob Bovet, who's been working with the Oregon legislature, about the repeal of their drug policy and the replacement with a system that emphasizes treatment more and allows also for the criminal justice system to push people towards treatment. So that is, infuriating to, probably some of the loudest people in the drug policy field. But I can tell you, I haven't gotten a single angry email. It's just people writing and saying, yes, of course treatment is good. Of course, sometimes people are so far in addiction that the courts have to intervene and try to push them to treatment, even if they don't want it. So I think often what I write about are really, in a sense, uncreative things. They're just what a lot of people are thinking, but it's not coming out because there's a small group of people who's very loud and sometimes can be kind of intimidating, dominating the discourse, but they don't really represent what is sort of sensible.
Absolutely. I find your article, again, when I read what you say, I believe in what you say. But in this case, you start by saying that Measure 110 failed because its advocates misunderstood addiction. And I think you nail it. Go ahead, please talk about
we should spell that out a bit. So addiction is a genuine, chronic disorder and for which health services are appropriate. But it is not like depression or chronic pain or other conditions that basically are really unpleasant for the person all day long, every day, in which they are incredibly motivated to get rid of. If you have chronic pain or depression, you crawl through broken glass to get treatment. But by its nature, addiction includes intense reward. Using fentanyl, even though it may be destroying your life, that moment of using the fentanyl is intensely rewarding, and people are very ambivalent about giving that up typically, or methamphetamine, or the other very potent drugs we have out there. And so as a result, they will not often crawl through broken glass to get treatment. They're quite resistant to treatment. And over 90% of people you see, if you provide addiction care, are there under some kind of pressure. So, the spouse said, I'm taking the kids and moving out if this keeps going on. The boss said, show up stoned one more time, you're fired. The doctor said, you keep doing this, you're going to be dead in a month. Or the court said, this is your fifth bust for drink driving. You can go to treatment, you can go to prison. And that isn't, you don't see that in depression. You don't see that in chronic pain because they are so unpleasant all day long for people. And Measure 110 really presumed that it was like chronic pain and depression. If you just removed all the penalties, removed all the pressure, removed any social disapproval, people would come pouring in asking for help. Whether that help was, I'm going to keep using, but I really want to use these health services. I want some clean needles, or I want some naloxone. or it was I want to come to treatment and I want to stop using drugs. That just is not true, and it didn't happen. And it doesn't surprise me that it didn't happen because I've worked in this field for a very long time. But it clearly did surprise the people who designed that measure.
Definitely. And we family advocates of old used to call it hitting rock bottom. And you pretty much described it there, but there needed to be a bottom. Now, some parents or loved ones would try to intervene and make that bottom be a little bit less harsh. But in this case, if you continue to move away that moment, and you said people will crawl through broken glass to get treatment for your typical diseases as accepted by the American public. But in this case, people will crawl through broken glass to actually get their drug of choice.
Yes, that's right.
And a lot of people don't, and people don't understand. And when I try to talk to people who know nothing about this field or this life or dealing with it, this is the only disease that fights you to stay sick that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's very well said. That's very well said. And we don't have the time to wait. Fentanyl really is different. If you are, say, drink like a lot of people, drink alcohol and use cannabis every day, you could do a lot of damage. You could maybe get in a fatal car accident, but the odds are, you will survive the next 12 months. We can't really promise people anything about what the next 12 months will bring with fentanyl. So the way families feel, and particularly, is far more desperate, and that's rational, of this model of, well, let's just hope one day he or she wakes up and decides, I'm not self-actualizing, I'd really like a different life, and comes into treatment, because they may not wake up. So we're going to push, and you can't really blame them for wanting to push. Neither can you blame the communities that are sort of overrun with open drug use and open drug dealing to want to push as well, in part because they know that people will die if nothing is done, but also because they matter too, and their lives are being adversely affected by the drugs. And in that sense, drugs are also are different in that way from a lot of other illnesses. If you have hypertension, the main person who's affected is you, but there's all these, economists use the fancy term externalities. It just means bad stuff happens to other people. But that bad stuff happens to other people when people get addicted. And one thing that is forgotten, and again, I'd say Measure 110 forgot this, is those people matter too. People who use drugs matter. So does everybody else. And they have legitimate interest in being able to be safe, to have decent neighborhoods. And they also have legitimate interest in wanting, their mother, their father, their brother and sister to recover.
There's a RAND study that came out a little while back that, again, none of this is mind-blowing. These things are common sense, but the RAND study that talked about the collateral damage of addiction, and that is so often overlooked, whether it's carnage in the family, what it does to the family health, but what it does to community health. And I think that that's a huge part of it. I always think of you, for a long time, since I've been watching you've always told this cautionary tale. And I think you're getting through and breaking through. And I know that the point of your article and your thinking is to say that, blend together the criminal justice system and public health, and you seek that balanced approach together. Why is that so difficult?
That is a very good question. Well, realistically, since the murder of George Floyd, there has been a great loss of trust in American policing, and so, some of which is totally understandable. That there have been, we've all seen them in the papers, very bad incidents that damages trust, and so in a lot of communities, people look at police and the criminal justice system in general as more unfair than probably they ever have at any point in our history. So when you don't have that trust, then it's hard, to hear someone like me saying, the only way we can resolve this problem is if health and the police work together, where the police may make the arrest, but health provides the treatment. So that's hard right now. That lack of trust is really hard. And then the second thing is, I think our broader political environment, as you know very well, is very, very polarized, almost like, and it's very much about team sports. Are you on team cop? Are you on team doc? which is it? You have to be this is 100% health. There's no criminal justice discussion, or this is 100% about the police, like we had back in the sort of the 1980s concept. And all health and all treatment, all harm reduction is nonsense. Those forces are very strong, and they easily take over, because oftentimes those are the people who are most motivated to talk to the media, talk to politicians, kind of shape a narrative that we have just two choices. We can have a carceral, brutal, racist war on drugs, or we can basically do nothing about drugs other than hang out and hope people come in for help. And when they do, we will help them. But otherwise, anything they do is fine, and far be it from you to complain or express any worry even about drug use. And that's ridiculous. I mean, the metaphor we use in the Atlantic piece is to say, they're treating a dial like it's a switch that has only two settings. You can have drug war or nothing. And the truth is, these are all dials. Like there's some good balance between how much pressure, how much support, what police do, what medical people do, and we need to find the right spot on the dial. But we have lots of choices. It is not an on-off switch. And Oregon was down pretty low, and they turned it to zero, and some bad stuff happened. But there are other states that are up pretty high that could probably turn it down a bit. Use jail less. Use treatment, prevention, health more. And that's the kind of discussion we need to be having instead of this all or nothing, whose team wins kind of discussion.
We could edit that little remark about almost every policy discussion in America right now.
Sadly,
as
yes.
You've said, we're so polarized. We're with this group or that group, and it's all or nothing, and it's so frustrating. I served for 15 years in the U.S. House of Representatives, and I always believed that the best way forward was what we would call the sweet spot. And if you can get people off of their perches or their self-righteousness and come together to find common ground, you can actually achieve great things. And sadly, we're just not there right now as a country. I don't know how we go back to it, but in this case, the work that you're doing and the way you're explaining it, you effectively communicate about being humane and being effective. Again, law and order and public health, that you do it. And I applaud you for this, because I really believe you are just such a great mind and a great leader in this field. And I hope you don't ever let that light dim. But, if you talk about the economics of what happened in Oregon, even, you mentioned in your article that there was a hotline that was put in place that I guess it resulted with $7,000 per call that they received.
Yeah, this was unfortunate. Again, just a real misunderstanding of the nature of addiction. So the idea was police would go out and they would have contact with somebody who was openly using drugs, say, and since you couldn't arrest anymore, but there was a ticketing scheme. So they'd write out a thing. You were smoking fentanyl on a park bench. You're not allowed to do that. Here is a ticket. It's $100 fine. However, you don't have to pay it if you just call this toll-free number and get a health assessment. And then when you get a health assessment, they can refer you to treatment. And over 95% of people just threw the ticket away, for which there was no consequence, because Measure 110 didn't believe in consequences. So you had all these people sitting around that you were paying to answer the phone, and no one was calling. And that's how they ended up spending $7,000 in staff time per phone call. Is most people were just sitting around. But to me, the basic design was such madness to think that somebody who is, say, camping in a park, in a city park in Portland, is going to say, well, I've lost my job, I've lost my family, I've lost my health, I've lost my self-respect. Oh, but $100 ticket, wow, I can't say no to that. My eyes have been opened. I'll be at treatment tomorrow, because this is the last straw. And just like, of course they were going to throw it away. And, and just how naive could you be? They've given up way more than $100 in their life for this. They're probably spending that much, on their drugs every day. So that was just spectacularly unrealistic about addiction care. And, if anyone had asked, I would have told them that. But that was another aspect of this, is that it was the initiative was ideologically crafted in a bubble. And in Oregon, unlike in California, which well, initiatives are the legislator can't touch an initiative. But in Oregon, they can. And every initiative's been passed before. There's a negotiation afterwards, and let's tweak this, let's fix that. They were against all that. They wanted exactly the way we have it. We do not want any input. We do not want any improvements. It's perfect because it's ours. And so they weren't open to those kinds of amendments that might have made it work better. And that is part of why it failed. It also is why the designers of this law own it completely. I mean, they were in a very unusual situation, which as you know, in Congress, you never get exactly the ledge you want every single section. They did, and it didn't work. So though I'm sure they'll blame other people, they really should just look in a mirror. They really, they blew it.
Yeah, I think they own that, or I can't imagine that they wouldn't. It's undeniable. Recently, somebody said to me that this person believes, and this person's going to listen to this podcast, I'm going to be in trouble, but not trying to shame a friend for bringing this up. But the question was, is this intentional? Are policymakers or political leaders deliberately trying to kill people on the streets? And I thought that was a very interesting question.
Yeah, I'm not that cynical, but I do think it is. You could ask maybe a less cynical sounding question is, are there people who feel that the deaths are a small cost to bear to win the ideological argument and get the policy of no restriction on any drug use? And I think at least some people, if given truth serum, would say yes to that. They would look at places like Oregon and say, look, you can now use drugs anywhere you want, wherever you want, as much as you want. I believe that is moral. I am a libertarian. I believe, if they say, I'm such a libertarian that the state can't interfere. If more people die, that's fine. That's the price of the policy, and I accept that price. There are people like that who would not view Oregon right now as a failure. They would say, well, so what? A lot of people are dying, but it's easier to use drugs, and that fits my political philosophy. That, I think, does exist.
Interesting. I think you've already said some profound things that are very quotable, and I look forward to using them to highlight this interview. But I'm going to take a quick little break, and I'll continue with Dr. Humphreys in a moment. But first, I'd like to thank Communities United for Smart Policy for their support of Sagely Speaking. America's fentanyl crisis is putting unbearable strain on families and communities across the country. We need comprehensive action that stops the illegal flow of fentanyl across our border and provides our communities with tools like readily accessible naloxone to help save lives. Please join Communities United for Smart Policy and continue the conversation on X and Facebook at Cusp Action to help bring an end to this preventable tragedy. Dr. Humphreys, you had another article that was a little bit, the headline was again, I agree with you, but destigmatizing drug use has been a profound mistake. Okay, again, you're reining in where we've been going with policy on these issues. Thank you so much. But what do you mean that destigmatizing drug use has been a profound mistake?
So that article started with a billboard. I live near San Francisco, and we have a significant drug problem in San Francisco, as I think probably everybody knows because the world's media has been here to see it. And at some point, people in the public health department partnered with activists and thought the right approach was to portray fentanyl use like in a beer commercial. So we had these billboards up of healthy, attractive, laughing, happy young people looking very successful, saying, fentanyl, do it with friends. And the idea was, well, people use alone and overdose, they're more likely to die, which is absolutely true. So let's kind of, portray it as this big fun social, event and try to encourage people to use that way. And I was just really struck when I first saw it. I did think, oh, this is like an ad for like Miller Lite or something. And I realized, oh my God, it's an ad about fentanyl. And that was a member of the Board of Supervisors, Catherine Stefani, tweeted that out and just with her disapproval and complained, and those were taken down. But that was an expression of a philosophy which is present to certainly within activists in San Francisco, probably some of the voters, certainly some of the people who work in the public health area, that the real problem we're having is that anyone thinks negatively about drug use in the first place. And if we just, accepted fentanyl use and methamphetamine use as a normal thing and stopped our sort of petty moral disapproval, the health of communities would be better, and the health of everybody would be better. And this article would say that no, that's actually wrong. That we actually disapproving of things. Look at tobacco smoking is one of the ways society runs itself, and that in general, people are less likely to do things that are disapproved of. When I was growing up, drunk driving was considered a subject of comedy, and you literally see it as comically portrayed, like on television movies. Beating your wife, this is going to shock young people, was like a subject of jokes. No one would do anything about that. Those things are now both shameful in a lot of countries and good. I'm glad they're shameful so that people know that is wrong. It's not funny. And we are social animals, and that disapproval is a guardrail to say those things are wrong. Well, we want to have those guardrails around fentanyl, for sure. We don't want to put billboards up making it look like a fun thing that attractive, successful people do. But first off, that's a lie. If you walk through the streets, you can see that is not who's using fentanyl in San Francisco. But also to try to destigmatize is a mistake. There are things that are going to be different in this very different world of synthetic drugs, like fentanyl, like meth. Law enforcement is different, prevention, treatment, all that. But we should not throw in, it's definitely not the time to say, okay, let's just embrace this. Just the opposite. That we should be rejecting it.
Well, you started with a very important point. The beautiful image of these happy people not doing fentanyl alone. What do you think a 12-year-old boy or girl thinks about when they see that billboard? It's like when we were kids, I keep doing that. I'm at that age now. It's like, well, I walked both ways uphill to school in the snow. I'm always, when I was a kid. But, when we were kids, alcohol was it. And it was sexy and you couldn't wait to turn 21 because that's when you could start doing what all those glamorous people on the billboards and in the magazines. And same with smoking at the time, right? The Marlboro Man was. And so the very notion that anybody, I'm even just perplexed that the billboard company just didn't have some self-restraint and say no to that. What a ludicrous message to put out there in the public.
Yeah, well, it was an insight into the bubble of the people who designed it, who often don't think about prevention at all and are sometimes quite negative about prevention because prevention is saying, don't do this. And they would say, well, that's just, that's that moralistic viewpoint that makes the life of people who use drugs so hard. Well, I would say, but thing is, everybody matters. Kids matter. Certainly preventing people from starting drug use is the best thing we can do if we want to, in the end, not have people addicted to fentanyl. I mean, you don't end epidemics by sitting around waiting for people to get really ill and then doing your best to save them. You end them by going upstream and reducing the number of cases, the new cases. So yeah, I think it's a great question, like what a kid would have seen that ad. Because to me, it would remind me of like, as a teenager, I forget what beer company it was, the Swedish bikini team. Who could not want to be what adolescent male? Oh, these beautiful women just love guys who drink this beer. Just like what fun! They're youthful, attractive, healthy, sexy, all that stuff. Portraying it that way, of course, that's enticing. That's why those companies pay for those ads. It works, right? So it was bizarre that they would think that this is something that could be done with fentanyl. But I bet honestly they just weren't thinking about kids because that's not about prevention, because that is really not their orientation.
Well, I respect people that are harm reductionists. I do. It's just not where my heart is. So I don't feel like I need to ding them or say that they're wrong, because it's just not what I do. I believe in prevention. I believe in stopping that first start before it ever happens. So I don't mean to ding them. However, as a family advocate for my whole life, or somebody who's been around the disease of addiction in one way or another for a whole life, I just, in good conscience for me, could not say to any loved one, here, let me help you use. My, who I am is let me help get you to treatment, to quality treatment, to good doctors to battle this disease. So that's ultimately where I believe everybody ought to go. So I don't mean to sound like I'm anti-harm reduction. I appreciate the hard work a lot of people do. But you also, in the article on Oregon, you talk about the lack of treatment facilities. There is so much money going out now, right, into the economy to handle this. Thankfully, we appreciate that we've come a long way there. But what guardrails are there in place that this money is going to go to quality treatment, towards I do seem that I'm getting emails all the time from somebody who's in this sort of quick pop-up business is going to make a lot of money off of this. Are we at risk of failing this?
Yeah, so you've raised two really important issues, Mary. So first, let me agree with you on the harm reduction point. I mean, I'll be very concrete. So the first statement, first time a presidential drug strategy endorsed naloxone getting out of the hospital and into communities and having people carry it was written by me when I worked for President Obama. That is classic harm reduction. I carry naloxone with me every time I go up to the Tenderloin, and I would absolutely save anybody in an overdose. It's just that where I differ from some people who work in that area is I see harm reduction as a means to keep someone alive so they can get eventually into recovery and treatment, not because I see drug use as a good thing that should be preserved long term. That's really kind of different. So it's not just harm reduction. We want to do this other stuff. On your question about quality of treatment, boy, that is a big issue, particularly in California and Florida and a couple other states that have a lot of fly-by-night providers, for lack of a better term. And you have I think the classic situation that I'm sure you've seen in policy before is when an area is for years underfunded and not particularly respected, a lot of the best people don't want to work in it. So it was very hard for years to persuade really talented professionals to go into addiction treatment. And to the extent they did, it was often people who had some heart commitment. They were in recovery or they loved somebody in recovery. And we got those fabulous people. But standards have been low because otherwise there wouldn't be any at all. And now we're at this point where there's this flood of money and the standards have not risen up. The accreditation has not gotten more demanding, which it ought to. There isn't really a good consumer mechanism like we have in other places to rate places and find out good they were. And as a result, we do have some quite bad care. There's no other way to put it. And that's doubly bad. It's bad because the people who get it don't get better or sometimes are actively harmed. And it's also the reason it's doubly bad is it also delegitimizes addiction treatment. People hear those stories and they say, wow, that sounds really terrible. Why should we fund this at all? Or why would I refer a loved one to it? So those are really big problems. I've had some discussion with our state legislature about that. Like, how do you raise these standards while still, doing the way that brings people up, as opposed to just, shuts down the sector. And there are definite challenges in that area. And I worry that what will happen is at some point, the Congress or insurance companies will look at this and say, boy, we spent an awful lot of money. What do we get? And they feel like they didn't get enough. And then they'll lose their interest in continuing to support the sector.
Well, it is complicated because you are blending together this disease that we talked about is difficult to get people into treatment. Even when you force them to go, oftentimes they know they're going to use the minute they get out because they're still in the throes of it. They're in their relapse which is all a part of this disease. But so you marry the difficulty of managing this disease, treating this disease with people who are shady operators, and it's just ripe for abuse. And I'm hopeful that we can get this right. I believe we can get it right. I think we can look at things like the tobacco settlement and realize we got a lot wrong. I know there are a lot of good people in this space, like the folks at Johns Hopkins. I know people at Shatterproof are working on this and making sure we have, accountability for the funding that's going out. Folks like Safe Project, who've been working on qualifying and quantifying treatment, doing a fantastic treatment locator. So I think there are a lot of great people who are putting good efforts to it. And you do say a lot of folks wouldn't go into this, but you were at the White House when I was in Congress, and I thank you for bringing those talents to bear. I'm with you on naloxone. By the way, I just saw an ad for naloxone from Amazon. So it's that easy now that you can buy it on Amazon. So I just want to make that point. Yes, it's smart to carry it when you're in areas like the Tenderloin or places that are high risk, but nowadays everywhere seems to be high risk. Airports, libraries, schools, you name it.
Yeah.
So why not carry it? So before I lose you, are you optimistic? Are we going to get this handled in the next, 5 years, 10 years? Never? What do you feel?
The thing that makes me most pessimistic is the lack of investment in prevention. And it's very hard, as you know, to get people interested in spending money that doesn't have benefit in the next election cycle. And I was talking to a friend of mine in the legislature, totally different area in diabetes, and he was saying, Medi-Cal, which is in California, for those of you who aren't California listeners, it's our version of Medicaid in California, is spending a couple billion a year treating diabetes, and we spend only a couple million preventing it. And that same dynamic persists in the addiction field. There's a lot of, finally, support for treatment, which is great, but still not enough spent on prevention. And a lot of people have an image of prevention that is 40 years out of date. They think it means like a cop goes into a grade school and, scares kids that if they smoke pot, they're going to wind up homeless or something, as opposed to the really high quality, developmentally informed programs we have, like communities that care, that invest in kids, teach them incredibly valuable skills that are useful not just for avoiding drug use, but for succeeding in life and have great long-term benefits. So our lack of investment, that makes me worried that we will be here because we'll keep having new people go in. That part is frightening. That's the pessimistic stuff. On the optimistic stuff, I could say a lot. For example, throughout the federal prison system, we're entitled to have treatment for addiction, and they're actually working to get that done. Congress passed that in 2018. We've had states, California, I'm proud to say, being the first, and I worked to the legislature on that. And I'll give a shout out to Marie Waldron, particularly, who championed this in our state legislature, that Medicaid will cover people leaving corrections in California, where we have an appalling death rate. It's your risk of overdose is just enormous if you've gone in addicted when you leave a correctional facility. That done now, CMS is allowing other states to do that, and something like 15, 20 other states have applied to do what we're doing in California, which is turn Medicaid back on before people leave and give them that transitional care. That's super important. That makes me encouraged. I'm encouraged at the way doctors' licensing and training has changed. So previously we had something called the X waiver, where you had to get extra training in addiction if you wanted to provide buprenorphine for someone who's addicted, but you didn't need any training if you were handing out OxyContin. And I always thought that was really strange. You're training most of the people who already know the most. So they got rid of the X waiver, but now everyone, if you want your DEA license, which is what allows physicians to prescribe, you have to have a training in addiction, both managing it, but also understanding where it comes from. So that will help doctors not be an engine of addiction, which they have been at times, by overprescribing drugs like Vicodin, like OxyContin, like the tranquilizers like benzodiazepines and so on. So those things make me more optimistic. That's the positive stuff I could say.
Well, I like ending on a positive note, and I agree with you on prevention, and I'm happy to consider myself a warrior alongside you on the prevention front and funding for prevention. And it is hard to prove a negative. It's hard to prove that you kept somebody healthy or that you made sure that they made it through to their vocation or, college degree of their choice. It's hard to prove those things, but it's easy to see the collateral damage when we don't do it. And I think that we just need to correlate those two things a lot more than we do. And I think we're getting there. So I love your optimism, and I think that's a great way to end. So I want to thank you so much. With you on my show, Keith, I wanted to just say, here's the microphone. Go. Just talk. But I wanted to steer you a little bit into some thoughts I'm hearing from our listeners or things that I've thought about after reading your articles. But I really appreciate you and your mind. And I thank you for spending the time with me today on this podcast. I want to also thank our listeners.
I was going to say thank you.
Go ahead.
Mary.
No, you can.
I always enjoy our conversations. I'm grateful for what you do in this field, and I'm glad we had a chance to connect like this.
Thank you. What a horrible host. I just stepped off on my own compliment you were paying me. I'd say something nice. And the other thing I want to say to our listeners, I get some pushback occasionally on, well, why didn't you disagree with somebody on this or that? And of course, I didn't have anything to disagree with today. But I like the listeners to make their own opinions and to hear from these fabulous guests and take the knowledge from them and what people are sharing. And so, again, Keith, I'm a phone call away, as you know, and I want to thank our listeners very much. These are very important topics, not only for our own health and our family's health, our community's health, but for the future of our country. So I want to thank our sponsors once again who make this podcast possible, Communities United for Smart Policy and MAPTA. Also, we'd love more of your feedback. If you have any thoughts, concerns, or questions, you can reach us at hello@sagelyspeaking.com. Thanks again, and take care.
Thank you for joining us today on Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono. Remember, wisdom is a journey, not a destination. For more insights, visit our website at sagelyspeaking.com.